Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this IMI Q&A session with me. I'm Sasha Pyankov. I'm a musician. I play in a band called Nooms. And Jейк Мюррей. Jake is a London-based music producer and professional sound engineer. And he works at this studio called Strongroom Studios in London. And now there he is. He's at his working place, spectacular looking room. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna talk a little bit about a brief history of music studios. Then Jake will tell us something about the Strongroom itself, and in the end, he will share his ideas on how the environment we working shapes and influences our creative flow. And after that, of course, he'll be happy to reply your questions. And I just want to say a few words about IMI. And this is not a commercial. I'm just a massive fan. And I think the guys, they do a really, really good job. They're trying to raise the level of music awareness among the people who are involved in music industry. And I think it's such a great thing in modern Russia, because we see how the music scene is rapidly changing and evolving. And basically what they do, they're trying to inspire people, both professionals and amateurs. And hopefully this talk will be also inspiring for you. So, sorry for this long introduction. Jake, can you tell us about yourself? Probably how did you get started with the music? And yeah.
Sure, yeah. I guess first I'd like to reiterate actually what Sasha is saying. I think that the IMI are doing amazing work, and in a rapidly changing world, it's quite amazing to see people who are coming together to share a love of inspiration and knowledge. And when they asked me to do this talk, I thought the topic was very dear to me and interesting, because we are talking about inspiration itself rather than any technical kind of focus. And although we will touch on some very light technical areas, I think it's really nice that we can come together and talk about inspiration of sound and music together. As for me, I was obsessed with music since I was in the womb. My mother used to play me music when I was in utero, and I would listen with headphones through the record sleeves. I picked up instruments as quickly as I could and started playing in bands when I was a young teenager. I've played in bands that have released independently, released with small labels. I've worked in small labels. I've produced artists since I was in my late teens, early 20s. I still work with independent music as a producer today and an engineer as well. Still release music very rarely when I can. I'm familiar with Sasha through his band, again, through the independent music scene and left field sort of artistic music scene here in London. And this is, of course, where Strongroom is based too. Through my career as a technical and professional engineer, I've also worked at installing studios, maintaining equipment, educating students. I've ended up on some pretty big studio installations, which I'll talk about later on, and eventually became the technical manager, assistant studio manager, and now studio manager here at Strongroom. I've been here since 2015, so a few years. I'm honored to have been trusted as the custodian of this place. For me, it is an establishment that represents a long line of history and inspiration in the music community globally. I guess about Strongroom. Studios were founded in 1984 and first opened their doors in 1985 by Richard Boot, who's still the current owner today. We've remained independent and very proud of that fact for all these years, 30 35 years counting, I think it is now. Strongroom was built with the ethos of doing creating a studio environment that was a little bit different, a little bit more artist friendly, and with a lot of community focus. We started as one studio in an empty warehouse in Shoreditch in East London, which was then a very empty and derelict part of town in London, and it's now gradually grown through those 35 years to become the centerpiece of the artistic crown jewel of East London and London as a wider cultural institution. It went from one studio to now 12 studios, 8 offices, a bar, a restaurant, and a beautiful garden in the middle that we all come together and share. We have independent gigs, concerts, we have industry events, we put on all manner of get-togethers and socials for the music community and for the wider community. It's seems to be a very loved place, and we're very happy to still be here in this strange year of the pandemic. Yeah, so thank you again to Sasha for hosting and for the IMI for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
No, thank you. I mean, yeah, I'm really excited that you participate in this conversation. And yeah, I've just found this in my pile of vinyl. And
yes,
yeah, and I yeah, yeah. You can just
it's a very
say
good album.
it, yeah.
Well, as I think like you and many other people, I think that album stands as being a staple in all of our kind of history, and The Fat of the Land is certainly one of the most renowned.
It's so influential, influential for me personally.
Absolutely, probably one of the most renowned and probably the most typical of and representative of albums here at Strongroom. The Prodigy worked at the Strongroom through every album up until after The Fat of the Land. Then they started working here, there, and around. They came back for The Day Is My Enemy, and they're still dear friends today. We, the Fat of the Land is certainly one of the big ones. We also have things like Spice by the Spice Girls and Spiritualized, Ladies and Gentlemen Floating in Space.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Chemical Brothers. It's the things that have been done here are incredible, and as I said, it's a privilege to be amongst that history and hear those stories and be in the same rooms where these records were made.
I've read that Richard he built a special room for Prodigy.
Yeah, we have. I mean, yeah, I think that was one of the first programming rooms. So yeah, we have 4 commercial studios now, 2 of which are what we call a joint venture with record producers. I'll talk about this later on. But we then also have the further 8 studios are currently, and have been for some time, let out to producers or artists who need their own space on a longer basis. So they have their studios within our complex. Yeah, so they've been around for a long time. Chemical Brothers also had a studio, Orbital. Lots of really amazing producers have been here over the years.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few words about our experience at the Strongroom Studios, because we were lucky enough to visit this place. Jake invited us, Gnooms, the band, and we came over and we had a quick tour over the studio. And luckily, we jammed with synthesizers that they have, and Jake recorded this on the tape, and then he digitized it, and then he sent over our jam. I still have that file. Probably in future we will share it with people.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was fun,
really
definitely. One of the highlights of my life,
Yeah, it's always a real pleasure to bring someone into my home, and when this is my home, and when we have an artist here, we try to make them feel that way too. Very much the message that we try and tell people is, if you're coming here, you're going to be treated like it's your home, and you want you to feel that way. And whenever someone is around, I always try to make time to show them the studios. And if you have talented musicians like Gnooms come and visit, then you have to put them on the synthesizers as well.
Yeah, like you said, it's not a studio, it's a huge community of people. And
absolutely, that's very much something that we try to cultivate and keep going. And it is kind of what I wanted to also start talking about, because I mean, to me, when you ask me about how you create an environment for music making and how you inspire, and what's the space that you create to allow these ideas to form, it doesn't actually start with the walls. To me, like music and sound and synthesis and experimentation, these things, they're a communication and a language, and you can transcend language by communicating through sound and music. And to me, what you start with is by creating a culture and a relationship between people. And I think that's kind of where I wanted to start earliest in this conversation. If you don't mind, I might just dive right in, because
perfect, go
to
for it.
me, like the idea of music being communication and being external and greater than these just walls in which they're recorded, it goes back so far in history. And if we start to look at creating a conversation and what our relationship is with music and with community, that's actually where we begin. You know, for me, it starts as far back as sort of native sort of tribal music. If you look at something like Native American campfire music, which is probably the most stereotyped of these ideas, you know, you have the shamanistic rituals and storytelling through generations and generations of tribes that they also use to tell these stories of mythology that they pass from one tribe to the next as they moved through the continent. It's a real kind of powerful image that, you know, everyone remembers. I mean, Sasha, you're on a label with a band that tries to channel this all the time with Goat. They're always they reference a lot of different tribalistic from different parts of the world.
Yeah, what a band! Yeah.
Motifs. And it of course is something that we as musicians have passed through our genetic information, is this history of tribal congregation and communication, where people, perhaps they're playing around a campfire at night, and perhaps they're wearing headdresses because it allows them, in a time hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, where there is no architecture and there is no space, but by waiting till nightfall with a lit fire and a headdress, they can embody a character in a way that tricks the eye and gives you a feeling. In a similar way, the indigenous Aboriginals of Australia, they also used to do the same thing with their music. They had song circles, again, to tell stories of the people, but amazingly, they would use this information passed through song to navigate the land. So by singing a set of songs to one person they encounter along the way, they will tell someone the directions to where they're going using landmarks. And you know, this passing of ideas through song is so amazing. And another one that comes to mind is the Kaluli people of Papua New Guinea, who they live in the rainforest. Well, they still do, and they would use their music to imitate the sound of the jungle and the rainforest and the bird song. And because they have this architecture already around them, they're already immersed in an environment, and it's already full of music. Instead of being in a sort of wide open plain like America, or a scorched earth outback Australia, the rainforest in itself is a musical environment. There's so much life and bird song that these people wrote it into their own music. It's something that later on the composer Messiaen used to do. I don't know if anyone's ever heard this, but there's some great videos on YouTube where you can observe it too. That he ended up listening to the bird song around him and scoring it into his compositions and his operas, which is just a really fascinating thing. So, I mean, as a starting point of just trying to establish sound and music as this communication and this language, and seeing how early on we've been referencing these ideas, it's kind of amazing. It allows us to liberate ourselves first and foremost from the idea of a place.
And I mean, it was so simple. People were trying just to express their feelings, and I mean, it was fully alive.
Totally, yeah. It was about creating and passing stories through generations in communities. In you know, maybe, as I said, maybe they did it at night, or they did it in the middle of the rainforest, and that was the inspiration of their time and their place. But it also just, sometimes you don't need to start with the built environment. It's the natural environment, and the world around us can itself be the inspiration for what is the perfect place to create music. And why is a really big question. Why would you create music? Well, in the early days, as we've said, it's to pass knowledge. Very common also in if you come forward in time, if we're talking about the passing of knowledge and information, you've got, I mean, let's look at in Europe, the rise of the Catholic Church, for example, where people started to erect. I mean, we erected temples all over the world, but being a European, it's probably my most immediate first example. You can't go anywhere in England without seeing a steeple somewhere, and it's a place that inevitably everybody ends up spending a lot of time, whether that's in Russia or anywhere. We know the purpose of a church. It's big to draw people to it in a community where, I mean, the world didn't look like it does now. It was the biggest building in the area. People would be drawn to it as the community center. You would go to this hall, which is usually stone. It's got a beautiful natural acoustic. It's complementary, huge windows so the light can come in, and you have maybe some sculptures of stories. You've got stained glass windows, and you've got this beautiful space which is designed to draw you in, like we have with a museum or a gallery now. And for those even who couldn't read, they had, you know, these demonstrations through stained glass, for example, in order for them to learn these stories. And without being direct about it, which is what they do with the teachings of the Bible, they could also immerse somebody in this sense of atmosphere and learning, so that when they sit down for their sermon and they sing some hymns, they're being educated, they're being taught values, they're being taught stories, but they're doing it in a place that is naturally beautifully acoustic. It's got a resonance. I mean, how many people have performed in a church since? The natural ambience of a church is it's a phenomenon itself. It's beautiful. So you have this community idea moving on from where we just were, in a place almost purpose built for the delivery of this information. And the immersion of that atmosphere and the windows and the light of the world and all this stuff, it really draws people in. And someone singing a hymn in an environment like this, they will be inspired, and they will be more amenable to it. They will kind of be more likely to sing without anxiety about what does my voice sound like, because there's 100, 200 people in this church, and they're all singing about God, and they're all singing a story from this book that they all learn from. And when they come away, they think about the sermon, they think about the hymns, they carry it with them. And even if you're from a different language, you know that you can go to a church wherever you are in the world, and you will take the same stories, maybe spoken a different way, but this allows people to continue this togetherness in this set scene. I think that's a really amazing image. It doesn't really matter to me if you're a religious person or not. I think that the example of the evolution of this communal music really comes together when you look at the church as an example of a predefined and intentionally constructed place for, well, in the case of our example, for music making.
I mean, the Orthodox architecture is quite different from the Gothic architecture.
Yes.
And yeah, the Gothic architecture, like, it was designed to deliver you to another place, like to God.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, with this massive reverberation decay, like.
Yeah, huge tails on it. And it is that thing of, you want to get people to lose themselves for a moment, to get past self-consciousness so they can consider greater consciousness, and so that they can listen to the words and focus on the teachings. But, you know, even if you're not getting sucked into the mythology or the teachings of the words, even just as a sonically complementary musical environment, it's beautiful, and they're designed to be that way. And the architecture is,
yeah, you feel it in your guts, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it really is that sort of thing. And I think that it's just a really good kind of example of that. And what it kind of, where I was thinking about this, I thought, well, how does that still take us to the studio though? You know, we got an environment there that is been designed for immersion, but it's not quite still not quite a recording studio. We're still we're still a long time before then. And like for me, the next step of all this, because now we're talking about building a space and creating a scene and drawing people in. Well, from then, for me, it's theatre. Now we're starting to look in theatre and opera, actually demonstrating these stories instead of just having the Bible and the nice space. You have also maybe a brochure, then you have actors, you have a stage that's been built with the same principles of construction in terms of creating a nice long tail on the reverb, but you also have maybe curtains, lighting, costumes, masks, and although some of this is naturally a bit more theatrical than what we're looking at today, it's what we're talking about is how do you create immersion for a start. If you have a place that sounds complementary in some way, and you've designed the environment in such a way that people can, again, lose themselves a little bit, and in this case, get lost into Carmen or Oedipus or something, or some sort of classic opera or piece of theatre, you allow them to enter a world in which the only thing that really matters is the message that's being communicated, much like before, focusing on a shamanistic ritual or a sermon in a church. The goal is to allow people to focus on the moment, to focus on the music itself and the message behind it. So I always thought that the theatre was a really good example of, even if it's a recital in a theatre rather than just an acted staged thing, I thought it was a really good kind of way of considering how do you get someone out of their head and into a moment. So yeah, I mean, for me, that's a really, really great example too. But
it was an inevitable step in transition from church music to just music for entertainment, you know.
Totally, but I mean, it was even smoother than that. You know, if you look at something like the morality plays, which are a natural transition from the church to entertainment in the theatre, the morality plays were based on the concept of teaching a story, almost like Aesop's fables or something, if you will. That they were stories created specifically to guide people on how to live their lives. You know, what are the values that we should uphold in our society, and through theatrical production and demonstrating these examples, they can communicate these teachings. So yeah, I mean, it really is like a natural step thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna spend too much longer talking about how people should behave or do, but I think it's really important that the foundations of everything that we do today in a studio are based on a number of concepts, one of them being music and art and community, and the other being a technical sort of scientific background. And I think that's very much a big part of it. You know, we can't ignore the fact that, one, most of the development of music comes from a sense of spirituality and shared language, and two, most of our technology was developed in combat and conflict. You wouldn't think it unless you looked at the advancements of sound and communication technology, which took a huge boost from the 1920s, 30s. You know, we got Bell Labs, which started in the 20s after the First World War, and they started researching everything from telephony to solid state electronics, which then by the time we reached World War II, you've got a huge development in communication systems, predominantly in mainly to communicate to people in cities, and also to communicate between ranks in war and combat. And a lot of our equipment has come from some of those basic ideas of, you know, design and implementation ideas in hardware has ended up in studio equipment. I mean, I'm sure we've all got some outboard in some of our studios, well, some of the biggest studios, any that's got components from old bits of plane or so on, or at least were designed for that purpose. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's funny. Now that I'm talking about Bell Labs and everything, that's kind of where I was thinking about getting into studios anyway. Are you familiar with Bell Labs?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. It's one of the most fascinating things, because to me, having just spoken for a short period of time about the evolution of spiritual sound and communal conversation. Bell Labs was the opposite of that in every way. It was a lab. It was it was a scientific experiment, and I find it really fascinating that someone can take something that is the natural element is so deeply human, but actually they were looking at sound, not music. And I think if we separate sound and music, it's really, really helpful, because it will then allow us to look at the principles in which we design spaces. If we're only ever thinking about music, then we're only ever thinking about it from a musician's point of view. And, perhaps that's great if that's your ethos, but you also might not be thinking about certain things on a technical side. And these people developed the standards with their research that allowed us to create technical environments. And those technical environments allow us to capture and experiment with sound in a greater way. It's one thing to then start putting a microphone up in a theater or in a jazz club or something in the 30s, and a lot of people I think have heard those recordings of what it sounds like. It's distorted, it's roomy, it's got a vibe to it, and it's very exciting to listen to now. But I think we're all very much used to listening to music that's a little bit more kind of.
Yeah, I'm always trying to saturate to give more harmonics, like.
And also just more detail and a better representation. And then you get to that point where you say, well, why didn't we experiment with it? And in a lot of ways, we started with something more basic than the full-on experimentation. It's more like, how do we make it sound even slightly better? So that's where the idea of going from one microphone in a jazz club or a church or in a theater to starting to create a space dedicated to recording. Well, as we get through the 20s and the works of Bell Labs and some of the transmission centers and public broadcasting areas a lot of it was done in Germany and a lot of it in America. We see the installation of studios where people may have come from the war and they say, oh, well, I love music though, and I've got all these microphones that I picked up and I'd just like to record some music. Two of my favorite examples in this case have always been Sun Studios in Tennessee, which I don't know, maybe you've heard of. They did it was a very modest, small studio called.
Was Purple Rain recorded there?
No. Before Sun was even better than this. They did Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And it was the most modest and beautiful setup. In fact, let me I got the pictures. Let me just show you.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, let me see. If I share this screen, and then I come to here. Okay. So what we have here is, well, that's not Sun Studios. That is an echo chamber. But it's actually coming to where I was getting to anyway. It's the idea that we start to build these spaces with it's not that didn't change, did it? So Sun Studios is here, you see, with Elvis Presley. Now they had a very modest room, one room in fact. As you see, it's not the most glamorous of studios in the world, but if you ever go back, if you listen, you've got I mean, this is after they reopened it and it became a sort of tribute to the days. But what you have is just this very basic setup, very, very small room. And they were recording everything from, like I said, Johnny Cash to Elvis Presley here and various other things like that. And I lost my trail of thought where I was, but oh yeah, it was one of my favorite examples just because it was such a simple studio, but gave so much. And because the recordings are dry, they're intimate, they're very dated in their time. And it just felt to me when I was young, it felt to me like such a original and sincere example of a studio. You got a space to record and you got space to put the artists, and that was it. It doesn't look like much now, but this was 1950. It was one of the first. Sorry, you're gonna ask me a question.
Yeah. Do you remember how many tracks were they able to record? Was it just 4 tracks, or
it would have been? I think it was direct to tape. I don't even think it was 4-track then.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I imagine they would have had a mixer going straight to tape, and that was it. But But yeah, so this was one of my favorite. I used to listen when I was young to a lot of Johnny Cash. I don't know how I became a fan, but I remember reading the books and stories, and I loved hearing about the process. And the studio recordings sound quite special, and I believe that people would go in and just record a song for a nickel or whatever it was, and as well as a money making scheme, you could go in and just record a track or something. I'm not sure now the story as I recall, but I just love the idea of let's just get down to it, record a song, and if it's good, we'll take it to the record label upstairs. So yeah, that was one of my favorite early examples of studios in the 50s. And you know, this is the most modest setup, and you get to the point later on, maybe in the 60s, where you have something like Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, which obviously looks a little bit nicer now, but they've got booths, they've got a large open space, and you can see these, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see these. Okay, cool. So I mean, then we're starting to get to 60s where people are starting to introduce recording booths to the practice. So it's like, great, we can record multi-track now. We can put a band in the main area. We can put drums or a vocalist in the booth or something. And then we start to do things like echo chambers, which is something when I was talking about the church, and I was thinking about church acoustics and sound. This is where it became, it kind of hit me. I thought, well, it's not just the fact that we become able to, to record things, but it's that we are actually not only inspired by music, but we're inspired by sound. Maybe it's the case that somebody loves the sound of their voice in the church and they really want to hear it that way, or they just want to experiment a little bit and get a different acoustic. Because remember, at the earliest stage, you were able to put the microphone closer or further away. That's all you were able to do. And if you're lucky, you can have two microphones that go closer or further away, and you put them in the right room.
Now you can get a fancy plugin and just switch it on.
Exactly. You can get plugins and all that crazy stuff, but I really love looking at the basics and the building blocks and coming slowly. And the idea that someone said, "Oh, but it sounds great in that empty room. Let's do that." And then you get Abbey Road, who have something even crazier. If you showed someone this, they would say, "What the heck is that?" It's brilliant. It's someone studied enough to understand the concept of reflections. They put a speaker in there, they put some microphones, and they move everything around to get a complementary and interesting acoustic. And it's just something that I think is really in its basic form. It's just so clever, and it becomes it's almost underappreciated now, the idea of using a physical actual space as part of the sonic process.
Sorry, Jake, do you remember the year when they introduced the echo chamber at the Abbey Road?
No, okay. I don't know. I believe they had it for a time though. Yeah, I'm not sure. Strongroom also used to have an echo chamber in the 80s, and we don't have it anymore. We use the space for other things. We still have a room with a couple plate reverbs in, but we don't have a echo chamber as such. I would love to have one. I had a go on. What were you going to say, Sasha?
I mean, I was fascinated by the spring reverb room.
Yeah,
it was really cool.
Spring I love all that stuff, and we've got 3 of those. They're really good. We have a couple springs, couple plates, some tape plays and things. Similar. Looking at this picture now actually reminds me when I was I did a session in September at a studio that's very dear to my heart called Shaken Oak in Oxfordshire. I should have pulled some photographs for it. I didn't get one up, unfortunately, but that's a residential studio in Oxfordshire, which is I've been going there maybe 7-8 years now. I take as much as I can there for a lot of reasons that we'll start talking about in a bit. But recently I went during a downtime when they had a kitchen refurbishment going on. So they couldn't book the studio out to their normal clients. So I used the opportunity. I did some drum recording, and I put some microphones in the empty kitchen as well. And I ended up using those recordings too. I guess if someone goes to my Instagram,
I'd love to see some photos.
Yeah, if you were to go to my Instagram profile, you will see on wherever it was that I did the drum recordings, I I put a microphone in the kitchen. I took a photograph of the microphone in the kitchen as well. So if you go to my Instagram, you'll see it there.
Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of really cool. Well, the other early studio that there's always been fascinating to me was Funk House, which I don't think I've got some photos of here. Does anyone? I mean, someone probably is going to know Funk House. I'm surprised I didn't get a picture of it actually. So basically, Funk House was part of the Cold War era radio broadcasting facilities in East Germany after the war, and it was a communication. I think they had a set of communication centers, and then it became commercial domestic radio after that. And it was a 24-hour station. It has the biggest theater open live space. It's probably good that I didn't bring just one photo, because there's just so many there's so many rooms that I really recommend everybody go and look at the Funkhouse website. It's the most incredible place I've ever seen. From the outside, It looks like a very basic sort of Bauhaus red brick building, but then inside it's the most fascinating architecture that just is incredible. It's huge. I think it's 900 square meters, the main live area or something. And they have studios there that we're using to record orchestras for the radio. And again, so it's Cold War, so since about the 50s. It's still going now. I think Red Bull Music, the culture program, I think, are there finally now. And Niels Fram has his studio there too. But so I find it, the reason I wanted to show photos was that the comparison between the most glorious studio, which it looks similar to this in Abbey Road. If you compare something like that to this from roughly the same time, it's kind of fascinating to think about. But it's
I think Funkhouse is a bit darker. I mean,
yeah.
Speaking of lighting,
Yeah, I mean, totally, and it's more grand and complicated as well, and it's designed and very rich. I mean, if you look at Abbey Road, it's an incredible space. It's very much more of a sort of blank canvas and less stylized. Probably one of the least stylized studios you could look at, I think. Actually, it's a very neutral environment, which is something to think about when designing a studio. Really, is who are you aiming that studio at? What are you looking for, and what are you looking to do? And Abbey Road is a great example of an amazing technical facility that also tries to keep itself broadly appealing in every way. And whereas Funkhouse is a little bit kind of, I don't know how to describe if anyone knows the design or architecture style of Funkhouse besides the sort of Bauhaus element outside, I'd love to know. It's not quite deco, but it's brilliant. I mean, architecture.
There is a really cool quick guide video on YouTube about Funkhouse.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah. It's a cool video.
Yeah, it reminds me of a point though, is that you can't really develop an interest in studio design without becoming interested in architecture and general sort of interior design as well. As we start to look through studios, like what compares this to this, which is one of my favorite studios, Electrical Audio. There's such different aesthetics in every way. I mean, Electrical Audio doesn't look grand. It looks like a fire station. It's such a different feeling. It will be so sonically different and just completely alien in comparison.
But it's a different era.
Yes, true. Yeah, the purpose and the purpose and the ideas behind them have changed entirely. There's something that I actually like that I wanted to mention about Electrical Audio. If people aren't aware, it's Electrical Audio is Steve Albini's studio in Chicago's. I don't know how many interviews and videos I've watched and read with him over the years. He's a fantastic engineer and a brilliant thinker and a great musician as well. There's something what I particularly liked about this when I was thinking about design of studios, which is what struck me when it reminded me is that they have a studio there, which is they have two rooms, one atop the other, which is basically the exact same shape and size, so that the floor between them acts like a sort of membrane, like a drum. So the idea is you get a better you get a better low frequency performance in what isn't the hugest room in the world, because it resonates with the room above and below. So it's just the sort of idea when we're talking about technical management of sound and acoustic construction, that you have to be a genius to think about it, but to then implement it in such a way that is not super obvious and isn't detrimental, but rather complementary to your design in the end, is quite brilliant. I've got a few more studios I think we should look at while we're still doing this. I think Hansa is one of my favorites as well. Does anyone know Hansa? You know Hansa Studios in Berlin also?
Berlin, yeah, of course.
Hansa is, you know, much like electrical audio. It doesn't look like a huge amount from the control room, but then you start to look at the live area, and it's the hall above it is the most amazing thing. Sorry, the hall below it. Hansa the studio is above the hall, but this is you know, it's they built the studio on top of the theater, I believe, and so what was a dance hall and a theater space, they then started to record it, and they put the studio above, and you know, they used this as well. For anyone who hasn't seen it, there's a documentary that I absolutely adore about the making, about Hansa Studios. It's still on the internet somewhere, available to watch. One of our resident producers here, Gareth Jones, he's been based at Strongroom for a very long time, since the 90s. He also did a long stint at Hansa, and is in that quite he's in that quite a lot. He's quite a prominent feature. Also is Flood and a number of others who've either been here or just excellent people in the industry. The stories in that documentary are fantastic about how Hansa became noted through this. They started in the 60s, I think it was the 70s to the 80s. They did most of their famous work, such as all of Bowie's Berlin trilogy, and later on U2 and Iggy Pop and things like this. But I believe when they did Heroes,
Depeche Mode.
Yes, Depeche Mode as well. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I believe that when they did Heroes by Bowie, they were up here, but they had Robert Fripp's guitar amp.
Oh yeah.
Reverberating through here.
I know this legend. Yeah.
And when you hear that recording, it's absolutely phenomenal. I really love it. It's such a great studio. Still going now, actually, and I think at the time the Berlin Wall and the inspiration of that created for so many musicians. But you know, Bowie wrote and sang about it, and he felt like it was a cultural moment in time to be recording so close to the Berlin Wall, where he could see it through the window. And it's another thing that I think is really important to consider. Not that you have any control over it, but the context of where and when you are is such a big part of music production. In the same way as we're communicating ideas, we should be listening to those that are around us, listening to those ideas. And I believe that we inevitably should be kind of communicating what is happening around us, and listening to it, and paying attention to our kind of the current events in the community, and allowing that to seep into our music, because what we write at the time, whether it's in our life or in society's history, it is ultimately just capturing that moment in a bottle. When you're trying to get the best take with a band, you're trying to capture that moment. When you're trying to get the right take, everyone knows it because it feels like electricity, and your job is to catch it. And in the same way, the ideas that we should be thinking about, and we usually are, is what is happening in the world around us. In the case of Bowie and Hansa, you know, Heroes and everything like in that time, that was very much about what was happening in the world. It was really fascinating stuff. So, you know, I don't want to spend all day looking at photos, but there was a couple more that I wanted to talk about, which I think is quite important. We are kind of getting into the element of what is studio design now anyway. So another one of my favorites that is really important to me is Electric Lady. So we talked earlier about, are you designing a studio from the perspective of an artist or a producer? Well, in the case of Electric Lady, the story goes that Jimi Hendrix turned to Walter Stark and said, I don't want a studio with any corners or walls. I want a round studio. So then they designed this studio for Jimi Hendrix, who has it's become obviously one of the most famous places in the history of music making, and it's just phenomenal. And being inspired by Hendrix and his aesthetic, you can see is just absolutely.
You can feel the freedom of it.
Yeah, it's unlike any place in the history of studios and music production. I think it's absolutely incredible. Walter Starek is an interesting man, actually. He ended up in the 90s designing the studios also for Russian state television and sound studios, I believe. And then when he's done all sorts of things from stadiums to theaters and so on, but a big project that I was involved in 2013, I can't remember, was the redevelopment of the Church studios here in London, following the acquisition by Paul Epworth, who most people know Paul Epworth at this point, mostly for his work with Adele and everything else. They'd just done Skyfall and Adele's second album, and he bought the Church as his kind of next project and studio.
But yeah.
So it was originally owned by Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, and then later sold to David Gray, and then there was a little bit of uncertainty and fear around what would happen to the Church when David Gray announced he would sell it. Unfortunately, Paul Epworth bought it. So the job there was to make use of this huge live area with this, and they basically, in this space, they put in the large console. It's two consoles stuck together, a Neve 72 channel EMI Neve, one console from Paris and one console from somewhere in England. And then they installed this cloud system above it so that they could record in the room with the bands. The idea was that I believe Paul, did he get it from Gareth Jones? I can't remember. He's also based here, you see. We just talked about him with Hansa. They developed this technique of, rather than working behind glass in a separate studio, to always be in the same room with the artist, so maybe the atmosphere and the feeling that you're trying to give and the impression you're trying to give to an artist is not so much the place, but also the intimacy. I think that's something that's really important if you're doing vocals, for example. Maybe you should have the singer in the control room with you rather than in a booth on their own, feeling alienated and like they're in the naughty corner. So they do everything in the same room, and the undertaking of the first studio, the upstairs room, was to just implement the big console and put the tape machines in place, and it wasn't such a major overhaul. The SSL room was a complete refit. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Jake. I think we don't have much time left, and I think it's time to move to Strongroom.
Oh wow!
If it's possible.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've just lost my microphone as well. Hang on. Can we have more time? There we go.
Sorry?
I said, can we have more time?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, look, we'll skip through this, and we'll just say, as you can see, the refit of 2 was considerably different to the sort of natural original setup of the upstairs room, which they've kept much intact. And then this was a kind of like, how do we make this very much Paul's aesthetic? It's very, very, very different. If you need to skip on to Strongroom, let's start real quick with this place. Does this look familiar? No. So this might not be familiar. Yeah, this might not be familiar to anyone before, but this is a studio called the Strongroom in 1985, which it looks kind of quite similar to a lot of the rooms we've just been looking at, and similarly, we've got some old photos here of Strongroom 2, which again probably looks like it's of its time. This is after we started to redevelop the studios. Whereas these days we have Strongroom looks like this, which I imagine is a little bit more what people were expecting. Strongroom basically looked.
Sorry, Jake. I just got a message, and it says that we got all the time in the world. So no worries,
great.
No rush at all. Yeah.
I was starting to worry I wasn't going to fit it all in then, as long as people aren't getting bored.
Yeah,
So
yeah, cool.
great, thank you. So going back here for a second then, if we don't need to rush. So Strongroom originally was this main room and looked like this. And you can see on the side here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but basically this is the live room through there, which I'll show you again in a minute. The console was this way and it looked very 80s. That's very 1985 aesthetic. The story goes that in the early 90s, around 93, the producer Flood was on a session in this room when the ceiling above started to leak. There was a shower burst upstairs and the whole studio was destroyed. So
Really?
the artist who had been based at Strongroom at the time, as you know, it's a community of different artists and producers and so on. Richard consulted with him. His name was Jamie Reed, and he asked him to redevelop the studios to be this way. So there's that same window. The room was lowered, so it's smaller, and everything was changed basically. I think, if we still have time, do we still have time to play a video as well?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well then in that case, basically to preface it, as well as being a home to producers and so on, Strongroom in the 80s was, in the early 90s, was home to a company called Assorted Images, which is a graphic design firm, and some other companies as well. Malcolm Garrett is a famous designer who Jamie Reed was affiliated with when he did the Nevermind the Bollocks and God Save the Queen Sex Pistols covers. They eventually went on to do a number of things, but Richard Boot, the founder, and Jamie Reed became very good friends. And when they had the flood, he said to Jamie, just do whatever the hell you want. Just make it, just do your thing. Richard's approach to studios was that, even you could see it in the 80s with the blue pictures, he felt that the common trend in design of studios in the 80s was that they were too corporate, too tame. They were sort of Hessian and white and very sort of stale and well behaved. And he wanted a place that, much like, although he didn't reference Electric Lady, he wanted a place that allowed an artist to feel like they're at home. So he then spoke to Jamie and said, look, I love your work, I love your vision, I just want you to do whatever you want. So I'll quickly play a video from him, and then I'll talk a little bit about the rooms, and I have one more video, and then we're getting on then. But let me just play you this. So this is the first one. It's only 3 minutes.
I think there is a small problem. We are not seeing the video actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know why. Sorry. 1 second.
Can we do it once again, please?
Yes, here we go. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Oh, that's annoying.
That's all right. So lovely.
Well, architecture from the start, and a lot of it, in fact, was very experimental. And one of the good things about over the last 10 years with working there is we've created, and I've always worked with a team of people, builders, carpenters, sound engineers, architects, and we actually have got very good at what we do. And I mean, and also the speed we turn it over, and you tend to find that everybody who works in it really enjoys working there, as opposed, you know, particularly with the studio builders, a lot of it is very mundane and 9 to 5 form, but somehow when we work in the Strongroom, the atmosphere is incredible. We really work. And you tend to get 10 times more done because people are happy in it. In the mid-80s, I was working in a graphic design studio called Assorted Images, which is run by a guy called Gareth and his partner Casper. And I was there about 3 or 4 years, and adjacent to the Assorted Images studios, which across the courtyard, Victorian courtyard, old warehouses, was a recording studio called the Strongroom. And Richard Booth, who was the owner of the Strongroom, who's now become a very close friend, was looking at my work, and I was doing a lot of painting at that time, a lot of big canvases, which were to do with this sort of magic symbolism, druidry, shamanism, astrology, sort of effects and use of colour theories. And he just said to me, why don't you take those paintings and create interiors for the studios, which I've been doing on and off for the last 10 years. But for me, it was a chance to actually put a lot of those ideas into a sort of more practical scientific situation, to use those ideas and to actually try and create a working situation for musicians, engineers and producers that actually created an interior and an effect which encouraged the creation of sound and music. It was like being practical with magic.
So there's some really interesting things that he was saying there. I hope you could hear it, but it was the way that they approached the design of the Strongroom was to marry this Richard's passion for creating an atmosphere that was separate from that of a technical space, but also fit in with the acoustic design and with the implementation of what you needed to do on a technical level. So in a way, although Strongroom, like every other studio, is a technical facility, they wanted you to feel like you were part of an environment. So Jamie, who, as he mentioned, is a fanaticist of color and magic, sacred geometry, and druidic culture. I think his great uncle was the leader of the Druidic Order of England. They had this shared interest in astrology and magic and color, and at least Jamie's focus was a lot on that. And they used these ideas of geometry and magic and color to give a focus that became one of the largest branding exercises, I suppose you could call it. Though that's probably not what they would agree with as a term. The thing is, as you know, Sasha, when you walk around through the complex, every single area has been thought of and covered. You've seen it in the pictures, and actually, let me just come back to these pictures here. I'll share my screen with you. We have everything from the floor design to if we go to Strongroom 3, where I am right now, the tiles in the live room, even they have been screen printed and designed in such a way that, although they're there for a technical purpose, you know, we have the tiles on one side of the room, and then further down here we have the wood and the soft walls furnishings to give a diverse space sonically. Their focus was to just draw you out of that, so that you didn't have to, as a musician or a producer, think about the technical requirements. And, you know, so we've got a lot of detail work done to draw you away and put you in an environment in which you're thinking about magic and color and what is sacred geometry and all this kind of stuff. And you're thinking about concepts instead of places, instead of thinking about microphones and hardware and equipment. You're thinking about ideas and mysticism and the things that I started this talk with. One thing I think that's probably worth me showing you as well is, if it behaves, is the change we made to the live room. I don't know if you recall earlier on, there was a big column in the middle of this space. It was a bit of a job in the early mid 2000s, perhaps 2005 I think we did it in 2014. One of the big bugbears of the studio was that we had this giant pillar structural pillar in the middle of the live room. So they tried to make it again part of the design of the space by painting it in line with the rest of the facility. But ultimately, on a technical level, you can imagine if you've ever been to a concert to watch a band perform, and there's a column in the middle, as there is in every London venue.
Yeah, of course.
You can't go to a London music venue without one of these things in the middle, and unfortunately, it was the case in our studio for most of 20 years too.
Yeah. But speaking of the Shakover arms, it's just such a weird place to play.
The Lexington, even Strongroom in the bar, we have it as well, and it just seems to be a common thing that people have these annoying pillars in the middle of everything they do in the venues here. So we took that out in 2014. Rebraced the ceiling across the top, and it just opened up the space in a way that I think we hadn't even expected it would. Now it feels like it's full of light, and really kind of makes the space a lot bigger and feels very open and quite beautiful. So this is Strongroom 1 that I've just been showing you photos of, which is the main kind of tracking area. We've got a grand piano here, and the booth was constructed to fit that in case you didn't want the piano in the room and you want it out of the way. We've got my computer is not wanting to play these pictures anymore.
Can you tell us a little bit about the second room?
Studio 2, yes. So I mean, Studio 2, Strongroom 2 originally has gone through many versions, but it firstly looked a lot like the rest of the Strongroom studios here, and went through a version here where we were surround sound installed. In 2018, we refurbished that room with Radiohead producer Najel Godrich. His aesthetic is a little more minimal. So we rethought the room to try and sort of throw back a little bit to some of the studios I showed you before. He was at Ocean Way Studios, where he used this console, the Dalcon, the gold one, which is Ocean Way is not that dissimilar to, maybe I didn't show pictures of it, but Sunset Studios, which was a nice looking airy sort of LA West Coast studio too. The concept of the room was built around this, of using sort of modern equipment with some legacy classics. The desk is one of a kind, built by Bill Putnam. It's a legendary, unique console from Ocean Way Studios, where Najel went to do Sea Change by Beck. He liked it so much he took Radiohead there and did Hail to the Thief, and he told them if they were ever going to sell it, they had to sell the console to him. He brought it there, and then this was his private room for 5 years, I think, until we redeveloped it in 2018. So now it's very much a different approach to Strongroom, and it's a more of what we call a contemporary feeling. This is the booth with the piano in it, and we have a lot of lighting to try and still give it a sense of atmosphere. But it was an opportunity for us to rethink the approach and modernize it in a sense. The thing that's really interesting about Strongroom's aesthetic is, in England we say it's Marmite. There's a phrase. If anyone doesn't know about Marmite, there's an advertising.
Yeah, of course.
There's an advertising phrase where you love it or you hate it, right? So Strongroom's aesthetic is very much all-encompassing, and it draws you in, and it's a statement in itself. And some people come here and they think it's the most incredible thing in the world, and some people find it very busy, and they spend all their time looking at the art instead of making their music. So this has allowed us to attract a different kind of clientele who might not use those rooms, who might want to do a corporate shoot or a music video or an interview. And it's given us a sort of versatility that we perhaps didn't have before. Before too, probably our most tame room was Strongroom 4, which, even if you look at the pictures there, it's a very sort of, it's still quite a visual place. It's Strongroom 4 is probably the calmest of the rooms, which is another room that we share with producer Danton Supple, who's worked with things like Bowie, Morrissey, Coldplay, things like that. So in the same way as Strongroom 2, we share a lot of the equipment and the concept with Danton, as we do Najel, but the aesthetic is still very much the Strongroom one. Whereas with Nigel, it's a little bit more of our equipment and a little bit more of his aesthetic, but it still creates a nice balance as a partnership and collaboration between the two of us. The thing I didn't show you, I think, is the room that I'm in now. So the room behind me is Strongroom 3. The photo is a little bit old, but it still gives you a really good idea of the space that I'm in. How are we doing here? So yeah, we've got that. I think I showed you this bit, and this is generally considered to be the kind of more considered and well implemented of the Jamie designs. We talked about sacred geometry a minute ago. We have these 4 compasses, and there's one behind the camera as well that you can't see here. Each one of them is to represent an element, so fire, wind, water, earth. Each one of them is a compass representing these elemental ideas. And they also tilted the whole room in angle with a ley line, which is part of Druidic culture that runs all the way to the Tor where Glastonbury Festival is. So there's a lot of strange and unique concepts which have gone into the creation of this space. You can also see, if you look at the bottom of the photo, they've got all these hand woven curvature in the island furniture here, and there's bits of feathers stuck to the artwork and stuff. It's quite unique. If there's interest in seeing a little bit more video, I can show maybe 1 more minute of another video that I was going to play. Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have time. Yeah.
Let me just move it. I find that it's interesting to talk about this stuff, but it's especially interesting to also see how some of it was made. So I stopped sharing. Now I share this one. Here we go. This one has got slightly louder, slightly more intense music, so you have to bear with it. I'll only play about a minute or so, but it shows you the process that they went through when Jamie was painting the large canvases that he mentioned in the previous video. No. Anyway, that's part of quite a long video that's on YouTube, which probably, if anyone wants to go and watch it, they can find it on there. But I thought maybe anyone who is, there's something about a space like this where you can't really imagine what it would have looked like before. And the implementation of the work is such that you can't really imagine how it was made. So I think at least I find it quite fascinating to imagine how the construction of the studio went in. And you can see there they have the carpentry team as well as Jamie's artist team, and they will have had the acousticians in designing. At one moment you could see you can see on a gentleman from Whitemark with the floor plan for the space and getting ready to make sure everything lined up with the design. And it's for me, all that stuff of studio design implementation is super interesting. And having been on a lot of studio builds over the years, I always like to see behind the scenes a little bit too. So I thought maybe that would be interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, besides showing you some photos of what Strongroom looks like and how it was made and the theories of marrying a technical space with a theoretical and inspiring space, I don't know how much you want me to talk about Strongroom specifically. I have a lot of things I can summarize and give advice on, general sort of studio aesthetic, but I guess
think
in a way Strongroom sort of speaks for itself. Unless anyone has questions, I think that the best way to explain Strongroom and how we got here was by going through all the stuff we did at the beginning, because all of these influences of Druidic and world music and the history of community is all the building blocks of how we got here today, and the technical aspects of implementation and hiding all of that behind a piece of art so that when people come in, they don't even need to think about that. I think that's the building blocks of what created Strongroom as a visual and immersive space. So
yeah, it just feels so otherworldly.
yeah, that's I mean
yeah.
I think that was the intention, was to just be here. I mean, how often are we just here and now? You know, when you're working on music, the real important thing is that you, as we talked about earlier, can lose yourself to just be in the moment rather than be stuck in your head thinking about all these problems. You want to be able to be as relaxed and immersed in the moment as you can, so that you can think about what it is you want to say and what are you trying to communicate. So it's a gesture and a creation of environment in which the artist can be free to think about art and not have to worry about what the A&R is saying, or not worry about what is going on outside, because it doesn't look like outside and it doesn't look like anywhere else. Instead, it's the collaboration of a studio and a legendary artist who just wanted to see how far that idea could go. And I think that's kind of what made it such a success.
Yeah, totally. And I have a personal question.
Sure, yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm sure you know about that nowadays the DIY approach is getting widespread. Like everyone is able to get a plugin to get a audio interface and produce a Grammy-winning album in his bedroom. Like we all know this myth about Billie Eilish brother. Who...
I think it was a well-deserved album. It was fantastic.
No. I mean, I think so too. But what do you think, Jake? Is the situation is it changing?
The situation is always changing.
Yeah. But I mean, I really do like to mix those two approaches. I mean, of course I want my drums to sound really cool. That's why I go to a studio and I record my drum tracks there. But if I need to get some ideas of my vocals and guitars, I can do it at my home. And I'm absolutely happy with that. What do you think, Jake?
I think a lot of people thought, I think a lot of people were worried that the democratization of music technology was going to kill the studio. And maybe those who weren't able to keep up or weren't able to change their position, maybe that's happened. But to me, we're not trying to compete with someone who's in a laptop situation. We're a different world. One of the things that I always say about the relevance of a music complex, because Strongroom isn't just a studio, it's a complex, right? There's many studios and offices and everything else. We offer something that you can't get at home, which is the community experience, which is the immersion, which is that you have a place of work to go to, and everyone around you in that place is doing something similar. They're all here by choice because they want to escape getting out of bed, sitting at their desk and just working all day and then losing their minds and then going to bed again. What you have when you come here is the opportunity to exercise by cycling to the studio. Then you can meet with your studio neighbors and have breakfast, and you can talk or go to lunch, or you have artists in 2 different studios who are crossing rooms and collaborating with each other. We have the unpredictable element of of community. We have a congregation of humans who are all in a place specifically to work on music. And even not looking at the facility itself, that alone is already an option and an offering outside of what you can get at home. Unless you live in one of those places yourself, like a commune, but not many people do. As a technical facility, we recognize that a lot of people are making the basis of their tracks at home now. Depending on the budget and the freedom and the flexibility and how far they want to go, we all know that a Moog plugin doesn't sound as good as you coming here and then running the MIDI through the Moog here. We all know that while you're here, you might as well then do some other things, and therefore you find ideas, because much like people who are experimenting with art here, or they're experimenting in Bell Labs or anything like this, they're oh, well, that was cool, let's keep going. Anyone who's experimented in a studio knows it's a little bit more fun than experimenting at home. You're in a place that's designed to do that. It's designed in such a way that through a patch bay, you can go very, very quickly. And if you have someone who knows the room, an engineer, an assistant, or a producer or someone with you, they're going to make it so it feels like an instrument itself. You know, a studio, an environment can also be an instrument. We have these big mixing consoles behind us. That's an instrument.
Yeah. Totally. I agree.
It is. I understand that it's a privilege, and for most people, they have to use their laptop. And experimenting with workflow is a way to get a similar sort of thing. And you know, don't always do Control Z. Don't always undo everything. Commit to stuff and then put it through something else and put it through something else, and treat it like you're in a studio if you can. Find ways to mix up your workflow and do something new every day. It will still feel a little bit closer to it, but they're different environments. And in the same way as I don't offer a recording room, a mixing room, we offer a space that feels like a large open area to put a full band, or we've got a room that feels like you come for the first time out of your bedroom and you need to go to a professional studio, we'll put you in there. Or we need you to be in Strongroom 2, which Nigel calls a calm and focused oasis. Or you want to be in Strongroom 3 because you want to use drum machines and synths and you want to do some guitar overdubs. The rooms are about feeling rather than application. And I think if you, instead of saying, I want the recording room, you look for something like this, and you approach that even in your home studio, you can get a similar result. But it also means that they're incomparable to a home studio. You know, you don't necessarily need a studio environment to make a hit album, but if you want a studio experience with people who are doing this every single day in a professional way, where they're in and out and it's efficient and you get the best for your money and you get an experience that is special, the special experience is everything, really. Your album is supposed to tell a story.
Yeah, totally.
So, I mean, I think they sit really nicely alongside each other. I think that they really go hand in hand. And actually what we commonly have these days is maybe some producers will arrive and they bring 4 laptops with them and they just go through interfaces onto the console, then they're recording the microphones using some of the synths. We get a lot more production and ad prod sessions where people have started with a beat or an idea and then they're fleshing it out that way. So I think it's kind of hitting a nice middle ground now. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what to say. I mean, I guess it's kind of getting us near the end. So I mean,
there are some questions.
There are some questions. Should I? Do you want me to summarize everything, or?
You can summarize and then I'll ask the questions.
Yeah. I mean, as I was just saying, we're trying to talk about what is a perfect place for making music. I think that there's no such thing as one individual perfect place. And if anyone's going to ask me what is the perfect studio to design, I just showed you about 100 different studios and I didn't even show you them all. It's all about your individuality. It's about context. It's about client. It's about the budget. It's about the purpose of what you're trying to do. Who is it for? You know, Abbey Road, obviously, as I talked about earlier, is a very neutral environment because it's working with certain types of projects. And here is very different from all of that stuff. They're kind of aimed at people who want this. I think that if you're designing a studio yourself, it's really important to think about these things such as context and individualism. As I said earlier, we're looking at the idea of a technical environment meeting an artistic one, and how much do you want to be emphasizing one or the other? how much are you wanting to communicate, and who is that you're trying to communicate? You can't detach architecture from interior design, because that's all part of it. You're building a space, and maybe you don't want to have something as crazy and artistic as Strongroom, but maybe you want to do something like creative custom lighting so that people can set a mood, in the same way as we talked about people performing around a fire with a mask so that they could lose themselves and get into a shamanistic ritual without thinking about themselves. You know, there's so many things to consider, but at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to, you know, who you're trying to work with. What is your target, and what do you think when you work with a band? If you're an engineer or producer working with another band and not for yourself, what do they want? Have a dialogue with them and find out how they feel about their music and where they like to be, and then that will allow you to choose the right studio to take them to. As I said at the beginning, well, somewhere in the middle actually, one of my favorite places to go is Shake and Oak Studios in Oxford, and that's because firstly, it's a residential studio, which is very different from a commercial studio, and it's very different from a producer studio. One is a commercial studio. You come in, you're there for a few days, you go. It's set up a different way. Producer studio is more like a bedroom studio, but normally high end. And then a residential studio is somewhere in the middle of the two. Now, I like to go to this place because it's in the middle of the countryside. You go there and there's no one around for miles and miles. There's a woods that you can explore. You can go to the forest. You can see the stars at night.
Sounds wonderful.
Can't hear traffic. You can record in the studio with the windows open. There's floor to ceiling windows shining into the live room. And people are, particularly writers, singers, they can go for a walk in the morning and see animals and find ideas and be in nature, which we tend to agree that nature and exercise are two of the best things for finding ideas. And if someone can go for a walk and they can just be in nature and then come back when they're ready and just jump into the studio, write their parts, it's such an amazing experience for them. And for me, the experience is everything. And so usually if someone wants to just get in and get out, we'll probably do it in London. But if someone wants to go and escape for a few days, I'll probably try and go that way so that we can immerse ourselves in each other as well. You know, if you're with somebody for 4 days, you can learn them. And as you learn them, you learn their ideas and what they're thinking about. And you can get an understanding of each other. So decisions you make on a technical level, they start to harmonize in such a way because you're starting to
with
think
the emotional level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as I've been talking all the way through, it's all about communication and contact. And the more you're immersed in another person, the more you're familiar with what they're listening to, what their ideas are, sooner or later you find that you're just doing what they want before they even ask for it. And then the time is more and more efficient, everyone has a better time, and you have more fun. And fun is what you really want at the end of the day. I think I dropped my mic again.
That's the main point.
Honestly, if your studio feels like a place of work, then that's fine. But I'm not personally going to be setting that up for myself individually. I prefer to not think of a studio as work, but rather a place where we work with magic and we're trying to capture a moment and have an experience, and that's a really special thing to me, I think. But yeah, I mean, I could waffle all day about how I think that it's such an individualist sort of thing. I think that probably my opinion is clear. There's a million studios in the world. There's Strongroom is the only Strongroom. There's a few other studios that look kind of similar-ish in nature. Electric Lady, Sonic Ranch, Analog Baby in Liverpool, a few that I can mention that are vibey rather than neutral. But each one of them has a different personality, just like each person watching this conversation has their own different personality. And I'm sure there's no nooms other than nooms in Perm. You know, there's each combination of people and each collaboration of ideas is what gets us to the decisions that we make. And rather than seeing it as the end result, it's also a progression and a journey. Strongroom 2 has gone through 4 different versions of the way that it looks. You know, how many people have made an album and then made a slightly different album that's the same album, but a bit of a growth on it. And it's all a journey and it's all a conversation to be had. So I guess with that, has anyone got any questions? We'll have a conversation.
I mean, it's just so beautiful.
Well, you can look at it that way if you want.
No. I mean, I think of it as a shared collective psychedelic experience.
Yeah, well, me too.
Yeah,
yeah. Let's have our own conversation. You said that people got questions. Let's see what they are.
Yeah. And I'll start with this one. Jake, for a simple beginner's home studio, is it worth to think about acoustics and reflections and all of that? And if yes, what is the simplest thing to start from?
Sonarworks.
No works at all.
Sonarworks. Start with Sonarworks.
Sonarworks.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want the simplest thing to start with, start by figuring out what your room sounds like.
Okay.
And then treat a little bit, and then read the room again with Sonarworks, and then treat it a little bit again. Maybe it reads the room and you're like, wow, I've got a big problem with my bass. It's corrected it for now, but I'll put some bass traps in so the software doesn't work as hard. Or maybe it's you've got a lot of problems in the highs, well, then you're going to put some diffusers or something. But first, do Sonarworks, because at least in the short term, it's going to be fixed. And then you can put some acoustic treatment, do the reading again, and it's 200 euros or something. Start with Sonarworks.
Is there an app or something?
Yes, it's an app and a microphone together. It's very good. I
Okay.
use it in my home studio. A lot of people I know use it in professional studios too. It's very affordable and it's very good.
Amazing, thank you. And the second question is, Jake, hypothetically, is there any need in songwriters, performers from Russia if they create nice music? Or it's needless because in your country there are hundreds of talented native people? Oh, it seems you're a bit frozen, Jake. Oh, you're back? Okay. Just wanted to say, oh, Jake.
I'm here.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, hang on. It looks like it's kicking me out again.
No, it's fine now.
Okay, so the question was, is there need for Russian songwriters in the UK?
Yeah, or it's needless because in your country there are hundreds of talented native people.
No, I think there's need for songwriters in every country from every perspective. I'm a believer in a sort of global communication, though I recognize that's ended up in a situation, well, I don't want to get too political about it, but there's benefits to globalization. I think the shared ideas, the idea that I can be speaking with people in Russia with the shared set of understanding as me is really a privilege in itself. And the perspective of someone from Russia is very different from the perspective of somebody in the UK. And the best thing about a different perspective is it gives you a unique point of view. And songwriting is storytelling. So if you're going to come anywhere in the world and share your perspective, if it's different from theirs, then they might be listening to it. But just start with Russia and see where you end up.
Okay, thank you. What is your top one favorite piece of studio hardware?
Currently, right now, the internet, I suppose, is my favorite. I don't know. I don't know. No, I'm not going to answer that question.
I mean, is there a piece of hardware you use on every single mix you are mixing?
Yeah, the computer.
Okay, man. I know there is a bar at the studio space.
There is a bar downstairs, yes. We have
how many pints of beer did you have during this time you work here?
No comment. No comment. I had some meals too. Yeah, it's an amazing thing having a bar as well with your studio. In fact, any kind of combination to a business like that, whether it's, you know, a cafe or something as well. The idea is that you're bringing people together. There's some gig venues here that also do practice rooms and so on. And although it's a nice cheeky joke to, you know, we can easily laugh about the dangers of a bar in a studio, of which there are many. It's also a really beneficial and valuable thing to have. Like it's almost the beating heart of the complex. You know, if you go there just to grab a cup of tea or you have a meeting, you'll see some people who have one of the studios there, or you have lunch with somebody and you just go downstairs. Of course, it can end up to be a late night sometimes, but the main thing is that it acts as a reason to get people out of their studios and to come together. And I think that is a really valuable thing. And the fact that we can have industry meetups or concerts from bands or DJs, or even just, you know, have it open to the public to people come and go, it gives a sense of life to the place that is maybe not as common in some other complexes. And the fact that we have an open area means people can be outside in the sun too, which makes it really, really special. We have maybe someone will see, if they look on the internet, you'll see some photos, but we have all of our walls are covered in green ivy, which turn red in the autumn. It's beautiful. We have a lot of different plants and trees, and it makes it feel very, very homey and natural. And I think that it's a sense of life that I think completes this place. You know, we have a lot of natural imagery here with the leaves and things and feathers and stuff, but to then have real plant life outside and to have real humans congregating and demonstrating that outside of the studio, which even if you're in a place like this can be a lonely place, you maybe have 4 people in a room for 12 hours, to come outside and see 100 people having drinks and listening to music and dancing, it reminds you that there is a world right outside your door. And I think that's a really valuable thing. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
And this is my last question
for
today. I mean, working flow could be an abyss, and when you don't recognize if it's night or day. Have you got such experiences while working at the studio?
Right now, in particular, you know, in Northern Hemisphere, it can be very dark for a lot of the time. I think it's really important to get out in the sun while you can. And if you can set healthy boundaries, you should. It's a bit rich coming from me. I tend to work even when I shouldn't be, but yeah, it's really hard to manage where you are in the day, in what time of day, in what day on your project. And I think that's something that we should all kind of stay on top of as best we can, and try and stay connected to people outside of the studio, because you know what, the drums will tune themselves tomorrow. If you need to finish, then they're still going to be there tomorrow. One thing I've learned as a musician over the years is that it's just going to happen when it happens. You know, the more I'm busy with Strongroom or with producing other people's music, the more I realize that it will slow my own creative process and stretch it out. But once you come to peace with it and you realize that, hey, I can still do it tomorrow, the most important thing is to stop for today when you can. You don't want to work from 11 a.m. to 5 in the morning, as much as it can be an enthralling and engrossing environment. It will be there tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah. So just
see
your friends and your loved ones, and remember that you're still a human outside of the studio. That's something I should tell myself more too.
Okay. Love it. Thank you so much, Jake, for being with us. Yeah, it was a great conversation. I had so much fun.
Me. Thank you to you and to IMI and to everyone who's watching. I can't see any comments or anything, but it's a pleasure to see you all.
I mean, if anyone is interested, you can subscribe to Jake Murrey's Instagram, or I don't know, maybe, yeah.
Or if anyone has any other questions, you can forward them to anyone at the IMI team or to Sasha, and I'm happy to answer more questions later on. Or if you want me to send any links over, please just get in touch. Yeah. It'll be a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. I guess I'll see you next time. And stay in touch. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, don't be a stranger.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.